coming in.
The title is honorary. I'm an architect by training. I'm definitely no historian. And the more I dig through family trees and county records and newspapers and the like, the more I understand that I'm not a historian at all. But rather than claim to be any kind of Bristow expert, I would like to say tonight, I'd like to be your leader. There are probably half a dozen of you that know for sure more than I do, just from several years of studying Todd County history. Of course, you can't do Todd County history without doing Logan County history, because Logan County is the mother of all of the counties in this area. And it makes it very difficult when, just today I was reading about a gentleman that moved from the coast to Christian County, Kentucky. And then 10 years later, he had moved to Todd County. And I'm thinking, no, he didn't move. You know, the line was drawn. And so there are all kinds of things like that, plus the naming. One of the most frustrating things for me in doing genealogy is I'll ask somebody, what was your mother's name? Grandma. You know. And then when you get into a newspaper or something, you'll find that the women don't have names. They're Mrs. her husband's name. And her husband is Mr. his last name, and that's about it. And it leads to all kinds of confusion, and sort of like the story we were talking about, the Little Green Men in Hopkinsville, and how that evolved over time. Some of these stories end up repeating and looping around, and there's one of these here. There are legends and mysteries involving Mr. Bristow. Now, for those of you that already peeked, this is the subject of our discussion. Again, I'm leading now, so anything that comes up that you want to add, please do. Corrections and additions are always appreciated. When Mark asked me to be here tonight, he told me that would be the subject, that Benjamin Helm Bristow would be the subject of the speech. And I agreed immediately, because I had stood right here and I had, to maybe some of you, related a story that I'd heard about him, and not just heard, but read in several different places about him. And so I had a few things in my notes, and of course, I was very familiar with his birthplace, so I just jumped right on it. Well, as it happened, just as he asked, I had discovered some of these errors that I talked about earlier. One of these stories that got sort of passed down through meetings like this and other discussions, but mainly newspaper errors. And I'll get back to that later. So anyway, I wanted to do a good job of presenting Bristow's story to you. And someone here asked, who was he? There you go. Remember asking, what did he do? Wasn't that what you asked me earlier? Yeah, what did he do? And I answered, and if we do nothing else tonight, let's remember just the one thing that he didn't do. He did not become president of the United States. And that's probably his greatest achievement that most people remember him for. But like all of us, we don't start on our own, no matter where we climb from or climb to. We have a family, our parents, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, that shape us and make us who we are. And the more that I started putting this together, all of these things that are up here on the screen were already in my notes, but they weren't focused on Mr. Bristow. They were focused on different individuals. Now, his line is right over here. This goes Bristow, 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 and it goes back to Archibald. And I'm going to get to Archibald a little bit later. But it's really right here. Bristow's mother, Emily Edwards Helm, that I think is probably the person that made him who he was. to a great deal. Now, did I understand that you have Helm relatives?
No, I'm from Elizabethtown, where
Oh, my goodness.
the
Well,
Helm, the central Helm.
The-
The center of Helm is.
all right, yeah, but you see right here,
Yeah.
you have Bristow, Bourne, and Helm. These are names, like you said, if you're in Elizabethtown, you're gonna hear Helm. Going across the top, his mother's grandfather was Benjamin Edwards, so we have Edwards. He married Margaret Beale, so you have Beale. Are there any Whitaker descendants in here? Good, so I won't be corrected on that. Now, when I made the left turn in town, I came by the corner, of course, and Breathitt is the name that I associate with Russellville history quite a bit. And of course, had to add John Breathitt to Mr. Bristow's story. John Breathitt married Carolyn Matilda Whitaker, the daughter of Penelope Edwards, granddaughter of Benjamin Edwards. No small thing, she married the governor, the man who had become governor of Kentucky, if not just for a short time. Also, right over here on the right side, and this is the last person I added, Benjamin Bristow's daughter, Lucy Elizabeth Edwards, married in 1806, John Gray. Now, John Gray was one of these people that, he was a go-getter. He did everything. Now, if you read about him, it's Major John Gray. For over 20 years, I've been looking for his commission. How did he become a major? Haven't found it. Unfortunately, there were so many John Grays in the military over the years, pulling him out from the others is nearly impossible. I will do it someday. But what I find him most worthy of listing among these people is the fact that he was the founder of Elkton. And I'll come back to that again. So if you go over to Elkton, everybody knows who John Gray was. He was the son-in-law of Benjamin Edwards.
Is that where Graysville comes from?
Graysville, yes, and again, Graysville, if you use AI a lot on your computers and you type in John Gray, it'll explain that he founded Graysville, which is now called Elkton. AI doesn't know what it's talking about. Graysville, of course, was on the state line where the stagecoach, you go down 79 to the state line, that was Graysville.
Tiny town.
That was, it later became Tiny Town. When the railroads came through, it was state line, and but now it's Guthrie, not Elkton. But getting back to Benjamin Edwards, I want to talk about him just a little bit. First and foremost, he was a patriot of the American Revolution, which I deem to be one of the greatest things anybody could be called. Anybody that survived, that fought and survived at that time is a hero that we should all honor. He was from Stratford, Virginia. He was in the Maryland House of Delegates, Maryland U.S. Constitution Ratification Convention. He was a mover and a shaker to get Maryland to accept the United States Constitution. He was also a representative from Maryland before, of course, he moved to what was then, I don't want to say it was Logan County, but it probably was. He was a pioneer. He came here with the earliest, right out of Maryland.
Did you receive a land grant?
I don't know that. I haven't seen it. It's possible.
Now, which Edwards is it?
This is Benjamin Edwards.
Benjamin.
And I'll come back to him a little bit. But I just want you to remember, he was at the top of this chart. I can print out all of his descendants that are in my tree. It's about 40 pages. So, you know, some of you may have Edwards kin in your family. If you are a descendant of that family, you're of course eligible for Sons of the American Revolution. The most famous of his sons was Ninian Edwards. Ninian was in the militia. you see these blue things, those are mostly military service, where the red things are governmental service. Ninian Edwards started out in Kentucky, right over here at Elkton, what's now Elkton, and he was in the Kentucky House of Representatives. He went on to be a circuit court judge in 1803, right here in Russellville. So again, you don't have to worry about the county lines there. That's where his basis of operation was, as he was the circuit court judge. He became the Chief Justice of Kentucky Court of Appeals in 1808, that's just 5 years later. And then, think about this, he became the territorial governor of Illinois. Now think about this, not the state. You know, we're talking about a piece of land that nobody really knew what was there, or whatever. It was just wilderness. So he was a territorial governor who actually shaped Illinois into becoming a state. He became the first one of the first senators from Illinois to go to Washington. There were two men appointed at the same time. He was one of the two. So you go back here to his dad, right over here in Elkton, to the son practicing here in Russellville, going all the way to Washington, D.C. After he was a senator, he was the third Illinois governor. He wasn't the first governor because it wasn't a state yet, but he was the third governor. That's some pretty hefty credentials, I think. And just like I said before, his descendants are many. This is Ninian Wirt. This gentleman knew a man named Wirt, and he was an educator. This educator is who is responsible for making the son who he was. He was so grateful to his teacher that he named his son Ninian Wirt after his professor. Ninian Wirt was an Illinois Attorney General. The Illinois State served in the Illinois State House and the Illinois State Senate. But what his biggest accomplishment was, he married Elizabeth Porter Todd. And that's why, let's see, do we have Todd up here? No, I didn't put Todd at the top. I guess because they weren't the ancestor. Who was she? She was Mary Todd's sister. They were so prominent in Springfield, Illinois. Now think about this. Territorial governor, now senator, and his wife in Springfield. He was very, together they were very important in getting Springfield to be the capital of Illinois. These people had a great house. She invited her sister, Mary Todd, to come to the house, and that's where Mary Todd met Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Now, so she's listed here as the great niece of Colonel John Todd, patriot, elder sister of elder sister and guardian of Mary Todd, who met Abraham Lincoln at her home in Springfield. And after the assassination, this is where Mary Todd retired and eventually died, right there.
That's before Robert Todd Lincoln admitted her to the insane asylum, wasn't it?
This was what this lady made her life's work, was protecting her little sister. And she unfortunately could not prevent that from happening, yeah. But I believe she probably, again, I'm saying believe because I wasn't there, but I believe she was very important in getting Mary Todd out of that, which was at that time likely death sentence. So again, look at all this stuff. All right, let's see if we can find another one. Let's come over here to Benjamin Helm and Mary Edwards. Benjamin Edwards' daughter. Benjamin Helm was a Kentucky state senator from 1796 to 1800. His, I believe it was his brother's son was John LaRue Helm, again, out of Hardin County, going back to Hardin County, who was in Kentucky's House of Representatives, the 18th governor of Kentucky, U.S. Senator from Kentucky, and also the 24th governor of Kentucky. So he had split terms. He was Benjamin Helm's brother. Excuse me. Yes, these were brothers. So he was also the president of the L&N Railroad, which has no small part in this part of the country. He was the father of the Confederate General Benjamin Hardin Helm, who occupied Bowling Green during the Civil War, and he was killed at the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, why is he on here? He married Emily, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, Harriet Todd, Mary Todd's half-sister. All right. So she was the great niece of Colonel John Todd, patriot, younger half-sister of Mary Todd. She's important because she was the founder of what came to be known as the Orphan Brigade after the Civil War. And I won't get into that, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. Okay, so I think we've cleared this side of the tree. And so I want to start and talk about Archibald Owen Bristow. Like Benjamin Helm, Ninian Edwards, they came of age during the time of the Indian Wars and the War of 1812. And depending on your sources, those get muddled around quite a bit because their service might have been great and it might have been limited. Archibald Bristow was a preacher. He was licensed to preach, I believe, in 1813. So he had served in the military. He'd gone up to what's Canada now in the end of the Indian Wars. Basically, he did what's called an expedition. He had very short service, but he ended up coming back to this area and settling, again, either in Christian or Todd, depending on which way you do that. Can we move this to the next slide and we'll come back to it maybe when I'm through. I can't find an image for Archibald Owen Bristow, or Arch. And I'm not going to read all this to you, but I put this in to just show you one of the things I was talking about earlier. Just like today, what you read is not necessarily a fact. And here's I left the date off of it, 1817, I believe, article talking about, 1870 article talking about the Bristows. And it explains who Arch Bristow was and all that. It wasn't written for history, it was written for the readers and primarily to pump up his grandson's efforts in his political aspirations. But you can see he was a native of Virginia, married in Jessamine County, 1797, and he was a Baptist preacher. He was a founder of a place in Bourbon County called Stony Point Baptist Church that's no longer there. But he served as the congregation for the entire time he was up in that central Kentucky. In other words, he wasn't necessarily a minister at this church all the time, or even a member. He was in the surrounding counties being a preacher, but he stayed their secretary, so there's a lot of paper on him. But we know he was in the Mounted Riflemen because he was given a paper at the end of his service in October of 1812. By 1810, the family had moved to Jessamine County, from Jessamine County, where he married his wife, Philadelphia born, to Clark County. From there, they came west about 1813 and were living in Todd County from that time through at least 1820. She died in Todd County. Now, 1820, of course, is the year that Todd was cleaved out of Christian and a little bit of Logan. So he was here at that time, and after she died, he was still a resident of Todd County, and at least one reference said he married again. Now, I don't know if that's the reason or not, but he is attributed to having as many as 13 children. Now, again, it'll take a lot of work to get that going, but I haven't done a lot of study on Arch Bristow, but he's certainly important. Remember, this is a political piece in the paper. He's attributed to have emancipated his slaves and settling them in Ohio. His last words were, "I do not know that I have ever wronged a human being out of a sin." Already Bristow, his grandson, is being painted in the cloak of the descendant of a God-fearing Baptist preacher who wouldn't even take a cent from anybody during his life. And he emancipated his slaves to Ohio. He emancipated slaves on his death. So it didn't read quite the same way, so they didn't explain that detail. Now, a really interesting thing. In the 1920s, a newspaper article appeared that explained that his will was messed up. He wanted to be buried on his place back in Elkton, where his family lived, but it didn't happen. Some of his family members said he was buried at a church graveyard. Haven't been able to find it at all. Some stories say that he was dug up and moved, reinterred at Glenwood in Elkton. I don't know if you're familiar with Glenwood, north of town, or north of the square in Elkton, but I haven't been able to find his grave there either. And there's stories about how they opened the casket to identify him and what they found in the casket and all that. More on that later. Let's move one more down. Of the 13, Frances Marion Bristow was born in 1804, a native of Elizabethtown, like we talked about before. His mother was Philadelphia born. His father, Archibald Owen Bristow, that we just talked about. He married, in 1831, Emily Edwards Helm. So now we're getting back to the Edwards family and the Helms. He was a member of admitted to the bar in 1829, practiced in Elkton. Hazel Graham Petrie became his partner in 1847, and their firm became Bristow, Petrie, and Bristow, with the addition of his son some years later. If you read Todd County's history books and family histories and all that, there's a story about how if you talk to, 100 years ago, if you talk to the attorneys in Todd County and ask them, who was the best lawyer that ever practiced in Elkton? One of them would say Frances Marion Bristow. Another would say Benjamin Helm Bristow. Not because necessarily he was better, he was just stronger, they would say. A third, if you ask, would be the partner, Petrie, Hazel Graham Petrie. After Frances Marion Bristow's death, Benjamin Helm Bristow had already gone east. So the partner, Petrie, became the preeminent attorney in Todd County. So if you're just a generation away from him, it would be in your interest to say he's the best. I'd like that. He was elected to the House of Representatives and served in the State Senate, the State House of Representatives, excuse me. And at that time, it wasn't like it was today where you could drive to Frankfort and back and cast your vote and all that. You had to live in Frankfort practically to do that. He was appointed to fill a vacancy, then he was elected in the 36th Congress in February 1861. He spoke in a big peace convention in the District of Columbia prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. Everybody saw it coming. It was not a surprise to anybody that there was going to be trouble. He and a lot of others went to DC and gave a lot of speeches, and his was one of the speeches that you could still read today. But after that, he was campaigning for during the Civil War, he was campaigning for Lincoln's reelection. He and Benjamin Helm Bristow, his son, actually formed the Kentucky Republican Convention for Lincoln's reelection. In other words, they were getting all of Kentucky's support for Lincoln to take to the Baltimore Convention. His son ended up being named a delegate to the 1864 RNC convention in Baltimore after his father had died. The day after Benjamin Helm Bristow's father died, the Todd County Circuit Court resolved that in his death, the profession has lost one of its most gifted and learned associates. The church, one of its most exemplary, pious and devoted members, society, one of its brightest jewels, humanity, one of its truest friends, and the country, one of its purest, loftiest, and most distinguished, disinterested patriots. Nice words, nice words. Again, a lot of this probably had to do with promoting his son, but we should all have something that nice read in open court in memory of us. Now, that same newspaper clipping you saw earlier reads, and now I've got the date, 1876. He informed his slaves that they were at liberty to freedom wherever they please. So you've got 2 generations now that have freed their slaves. He and his widow were originally interred at Edwards Hall and reinterred at Glenwood in Elkton. Remember he's saying that this stuff kind of winds back on itself? The story is that they opened his casket to make sure it was him. And they noticed some sloshing around, so they didn't know what was going to be in the casket. And it was a big metal box, it's very heavy. They opened it up to find him looking much like the portrait you see there, except for the tip of his nose. The casket originally being filled over time with the decomposition. The level of the brandy had dropped, and his nose was the only thing that had deteriorated. Does that sound familiar, that story about being moved from one place to the other? We'll come back to that. Let's go on to Benjamin Hill.
You said brandy, you mean that they were like, it's like the way of the bombing?
No, this was just a preserve. It was
Excuse me, the fellow that we just were talking about, I noticed his hand is in his, I've
yes.
seen that before. Is there a special reason for that? Is it a lost
I don't know.
hand or just
That's what
some
photographers,
gesture? I don't know
that's
what
what
it means.
photographers decided they ought to do when they get their photograph.
It's what?
Looks nice, doesn't it?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Napoleon, okay, well, thank you.
Say that again?
It could have been a Napoleon
Yeah.
pose.
Yeah.
The timing was right, and it could have been to keep them from moving their hands about and not looking like this, and you know.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I didn't think I know that.
His home, where Benjamin Helm Bristow was born, was called Edwards Hall. The house there was built by Benjamin Edwards that we talked about first. Benjamin Edwards is interred there on the property, as is his son, Elisha B. Edwards, and their wives. Benjamin Edwards is lying in repose under a large slab, about a little bit longer than this table and about as wide as where I'm holding this stick. You've seen these box graves above ground, box monuments above the graves. That's the way he was buried. And this headstone is really at the end of that, freestanding from the box. And you can't really see the bottom of that, that's why you just have a detail there. Now, this cemetery is just over on the edge of this property. I've highlighted about 500 acres, which was the plantation. The easiest way to explain it is when he came to Elkton, Elkton was just a little place right here on the bank of the creek where the Allensville Greenville Road crossed the trace that connected Russellville to what's now Hopkinsville. So the plantation set off of that trace like this. In different times, other plantations surrounded it. On this side was the Reeves plantation. Over here we had the new plantation. Closer into town, we had the McReynolds family's plantation. This area right here where Elkton sits today in the public square was John Gray's land prior to Elkton's being built. And so, again, we have a very rural area. We had these huge plantations. Edwards Hall was one of them. Eventually, railroad came through, subdivisions came in on 3 sides. This street was actually built long after the Edwards were there. And I'm going to try to get this right. Francis Marion Bristow, Benjamin Helm Bristow's father, gave away part of the plantation. One of these dots right here became the Green River Academy for girls. It may have been the Green River Female Academy at that time, is probably what they called it. He promoted this, he served on the board, and it was the building that's there today. It was built about 1830, I believe.
35.
Thank you. But I've tried to tie it back together with this family line. But it, again, wouldn't even be there had the Edwards, the Helms, and the Bristows hadn't passed it on or made the land for it. By 1850, it was 500 acres. That's where I got that number up there. And if you go into the records and over in Elkton or online, you'll see where half of it was tillable, half of it was not, unimproved. And it talks about what his cash on hand is and what all of his crops were worth and all that. And again, what I'm trying to do is explain once again that when Benjamin Helm Bristow was born, right there, he came into this huge family that had history of people that are buried right there on the grounds that did great things and went on. And obviously was a money-making thing.
Can you see these graves, or are they open to the public?
It's private land, thank you for asking. Francis Trover owns it now. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but a couple of weeks ago after you called, I asked Francis if I could go and visit the grave. I didn't want to just show up. And having done this for over 50 years, this is the first time I ever got lost looking for a grave. Now, there have been some graves I never found and that sort of thing. I found this one, but when I started to go back to my car, I was totally disoriented, and I'll show you that a little bit later. You notice how the one tombstone here is fairly clear. I said this one's really partially obscured. I'll show you another photograph later on. Let's go on. I'm trying to get we're finally here. This is not this is a riches to riches story. This man started out on third base, as they say about others, but he obviously had some sort of moral compass. He made everybody mad that was around him because he was such a straight line kind of guy. You probably knew somebody like that, or you maybe had parents that were kind of like that. You just walked that line, you didn't go one way or the other. That's the way he was. And I believe he dismissed anyone that he observed that he thought might not be doing the right thing one way or the other. And it cost him later on. Again, he was born in 1832 at Edwards Hall. He was the eldest of 4 siblings, and I've got his family there. It's a small family. His primary education was at what was called the Male Academy in Elkton. I don't know if this was the Presbyterian Academy where Greenwood Cemetery sits now, excuse me, the Jefferson Academy where Greenwood sits now, and burned later on or not. But anyway, he had a primary education, but at some point, he was sent to the private school of Dr. W.D. Jones, and it says near Hopkinsville. I don't know where that was, but obviously he had to get this private education. And some documents say it was his senior year that he left from there to get a degree from Jefferson College in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. He was there a year, graduated. It was more like a finishing school than what our high schools are today, or a college. But he did get a degree, and it was admitted to the bar when he returned to his father's office, practiced law in Elkton, Hopkinsville, and later Louisville. Now this is really important. Leaving Hopkinsville, he just kind of one day said, I don't like this anymore. Left what was obviously a thriving practice and moved to Louisville, where he could make more money probably, but at least he could do what he wanted to do. He had married Abigail Slaughter, Abby Bristow, and that would be the Bristow marriage if you're looking in the society pages of the day. Obviously they made a handsome couple, as you see in these photographs about the time. She was born in Elkton, and their son was born in Hopkinsville. So leaving Hopkinsville was no small thing to go to Louisville. Let's go to the next. His plans didn't quite work out the way he expected. He became a major from Hopkinsville in the Home Guard, followed by a commission to lieutenant colonel from Governor Magoffin in 1861. This is just, you know when that was anyway. He joined General J.M. Shackelford in Henderson, Kentucky, and organized the 25th Kentucky Infantry. It's said that he paid recruits out of Tennessee to join and fight under him. And this was so that they could take care of their affairs, because they were leaving their home probably forever. They joined Grant's army of 24,500 in the 6-day infantry and gunboat siege of Fort Donelson, ultimately defeating 16,000 defenders on 16 February 1862. Grant's army was later ambushed and forced into defensive positions near, is it Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh? Does anybody know Pittsburgh Landing? I see it written both ways in the documents. Anyway, it's just a bend in the river that the gunboats could come to, which is significant. They were beaten. On the first day, they were just beaten. They were scattered all into the woods. If you've ever been to Adamsville in Tennessee and visited the battlefield, it's not a battlefield. And you mentioned Napoleon earlier. Wasn't that kind of battlefield at all. It was clumps of trees, and they were all just scattered and defeated. Grant had them, and you remember, this had been a great victory with unconditional surrender at Fort Donelson, and now they were getting beaten at Shiloh. But they'd been ordered to stay because recruits were coming. So reinforcements did come overnight. The gunboats were there. The next day they turned the battle. And it was in the Battle of Shiloh that even though Grant's forces won, they had overwhelming numbers the second day. Bristow was nearly killed when a shell went off over his head. He was removed from his duty by an underling who explained that he found him on the field insensible and deaf. So he was not only relieved of duty, he was taken off the field of battle during the battle. And some thought he would die because this shell had just gone off. I haven't read anything about the particulars of any wounds or anything like that, but clearly it was a serious thing. He didn't recover until the following July and was promoted to colonel. I missed a line here. From the battlefield, he was brought to Russellville, Kentucky to recuperate. Now, I'm not sure why. Do y'all know, was there a hospital here?
There was one.
Okay, that explains it. So it was a Union hospital.
I guess it was occupied by the Union during the Civil War during that period, so it may have been for the area.
That was one of my questions. I wondered if anybody would know. But anyway, he was brought here. He recovered by July, was promoted to colonel to lead the 1,248-man 8th Kentucky Cavalry in protecting the state. On 21 March 1863, he was very unhappy. If you're a colonel defending the entire state of Kentucky, you expect to have more than 1,248 people in your colonelcy. And he saw it as a slight. But remember, Kentucky was not a popular place from DC and from the generals because of what you were just talking about. That it was allied with the Union, but especially around here, well, I don't want to get into that.
It can be split.
It was different, yes. He wrote, now he's in Hardin County on March 1863. It's true that nearly all the citizens of Russellville are rebels and deserve no sympathy or protection at the hands of the government. So he didn't think much of Russellville even after he'd been recuperated here. At Wellsville, Ohio in July of '63, he was among those that captured Morgan's raiders, forcing them to surrender to General Shackleton. It says here that Colonel Bristow and the 8th Kentucky Cavalry looked on at Morgan's surrender. This helped him. It gave him something for his resume, because Morgan was really tearing up, coming out of the South and heading all the way into Ohio, I'm told. And everywhere he went, it was devastation. So
Destroyed train bridges and
everything. It was just they're called guerrillas at some point, just for what they did and how they did it. So he had a feather in his cap just by being there at that surrender. So his private life had been destroyed by the Civil War. He had the injury, he had this great victory here, and now he finally had something that very few others could claim, that he had helped capture Morgan. So in September, he was elected to the Kentucky State Congress. No, I've got to go back one. In August 1863, he was elected by Christian County's state senator without his knowledge. So they thought enough of him to vote him state senator in absentia. He only learned of it after later on. In September of '63, he was elected to the state Congress and began his term in December. He met Lincoln in December as the state senator, and on 5 January 1864, he carried a letter of grievances. Remember what I said earlier about Kentucky being a sort of stepchild to DC? There were all kinds of things going on. If I understand it correctly, one of the things that happened, and you know how we're celebrating Juneteenth now, about when Lincoln freed the slaves? If I understand it right, he freed the slaves in the South, but not in Kentucky for some reason.
Yeah.
And so,
Tennessee. Yeah.
so this
Not in Missouri either.
So this was, you're right, obviously. But this was one of the grievances that he felt needed to be corrected.
Kentucky was considered a neutral state, not part of the Confederacy, so it's kind of like
Yeah.
a bureaucratic thing.
It's dock and boat, is what it is. After that, he returned to his practice in Hopkinsville and then moved to Louisville, as we talked about earlier. He accepted in November 1865, he accepted the post of Assistant State Attorney General and was subsequently promoted to Attorney General. Apparently, the gentleman that was the Attorney General was not up to the job because he was an old man like me. And so they brought in this young war hero to replace him. They made him the assistant, and then he became the top man there. Again, he resigned. He wasn't happy as the Attorney General. He resigned to practice law with John Harlan and John Newman. Let's see the next slide. That didn't last very long either. He ended up being named the first United States Solicitor General. And here, he'd done such a good job with that other post that they put him in as really to establish the U.S. government's legal authority, and he had his personal agenda. Remember what the newspapers were saying about his family, but protecting the civil rights during post-Civil War Reconstruction. If you go through his papers, he's talking about civil rights, again, 100 years before it really, you can understand why he was not a happy man, wherever he was. He was born 100 years too soon, because civil rights were really not going to happen. But as Solicitor General, he prosecuted thousands of Klansmen, thousands, under the what's called the Enforcement Acts. He brought numerous indictments and convictions, and his vigorous enforcement of the law resulted in a noticeable drop in the kinds of violence, things that were happening in this part of the country and elsewhere in the South especially. Everybody said, oh, things are getting better. Well, it didn't last very long, because he ended up moving on, and the violence really came back. In 1871, he delivered a speech in Kentucky. Now, he's coming from Washington back to Kentucky to advocate for black citizens to have the right to testify in court cases, because there was a state law that said they could not sue or to even testify against a white man. And he called it a monstrous and grievous wrong. So, whether or not his father and his grandfather really emancipated their slaves out of the goodness of their hearts, he didn't have slaves. He didn't have to do this, but he did. So again, I think some of this background we talked about, it was a real thing with him. But he was dissatisfied in Washington. He abruptly resigned again to accept a brief, lucrative position as legal counsel for the Texas and Pacific Railroad. Yeah. In 1874, he was appointed by President Grant, and the press hailed the action from Grant, calling Bristow a much-needed reformer. So his reputation preceded him as the 30th Secretary of the United States Treasury. It's hard for us to believe, but you know, Washington at that time apparently was a very corrupt place. And he thought nothing of going after anyone, if he saw something wrong. As Secretary of the United States Treasury, he could see the money. He knew where things were going wrong. He was in DC, and he called them out. He dismissed 700 Treasury Department employees. Now that's no small thing, just, you're gone, and here's why. He favored the use of coin over greenbacks. We can't even imagine today that somebody would say, okay, here's $100, and hand you the coins. But Grant was worried about the overall economy. It was easier to print money than it was to find gold. And he ended up backing Grant in spite of his own feelings about the currency. But he undercut Grant's naval secretary basically by going directly to Grant and saying, this man's no good. You know, he's not there to make friends. He's there to clean up. One thing he did is out west, and I'm talking about the other side of the Mississippi now, apparently there was all kinds of corruption in whiskey, specifically for not paying taxes. Again, if you're the Secretary of the Treasury, you want to see money coming in, why is it nobody out west is paying taxes? So he broke up what was called the whiskey ring. And they say it was with relentless zeal, investigation, and prosecution. This raised him another notch in the public's eye. Here's a Thomas Nast cartoon showing a Kentucky distiller saying, probe away. The people in Bardstown, in Louisville, apparently were paying their taxes. They ended up not being imprisoned by his actions. For some reason, Grant started taking heat. And it may have been because Kentucky didn't get hit like the western states. And even though Bristow actually shielded Grant, he knew things about Grant nobody else knew. And he favored Grant, he shielded him, but even that created friction between the two men. And so Bristow resigned rather than being dismissed.
Grant's has always been described as having a very corrupt administration. Would he be like an exception?
Yeah, imagine sitting at the table, you're corrupt, you're corrupt, you're corrupt. I'm an angel, you know.
I think that's why Grant had 2 vice presidents.
Yeah.
At one time, or
No, separate terms.
Has anyone seen the current pay-for-play
Death by Lightning.
Death by Lightning?
It's on my watch list.
I recommend it. I'm not saying it's history, but it makes this scene, not this particular convention, but a scene like it 4 years later, come alive. And those of us that have never been to a convention, they did a really good job in that. So, but I think this engraving really shows what went on in Cincinnati at the Exposition Hall in June of 1876.
you ready?
This is it. All my life I heard that he missed being president by 1 vote. Someone said that 1 vote was a fellow that came to see him when he was not feeling well, and Bristow was ill-mannered, and the man left saying, I'll never vote for him. So he didn't vote for him, and Bristow lost being nominated for president by 1 vote. That's not true at all. It's just a story. But there was a vote, and Bristow held his own more than anyone else in the convention. In that movie we were talking about, I believe James G. Blaine was one of the major players.
Yeah, he would be nominated in 1984.
And they, this convention in Cincinnati, where Bristow was up for the presidency nomination, was in Cincinnati. It was in Ohio. Blaine was the governor. I don't know that Bristow ever had a chance, but if you look at the numbers, Blaine had 285 to Bristow's 113. Now down here is clearly more than Bristow would have needed to overcome it. But look at Rutherford B. Hayes. In the first ballot, it's only 61 votes. Hayes, 64, 67, 68. And by the time Hayes was getting 67 and 68, Bristow had gained to 121 and 126. So he was clearly second, third, second, third. After the third ballot, after he was third in the sixth ballot, which Blaine was actually winning. So Blaine had gotten his act together at this point. Blaine gave up, everybody else gave up. They said, no, we've done this enough. We're turning all of our votes over to Rutherford B. Hayes. In spite of that, Blaine got 351 votes, and Bristow got 21, even though he had said he would not be nominated.
And there were some Republicans trying to get James Blaine to run against Benjamin Harrison in 1892, which would have been interesting because it would have been a rematch of the 1884 presidential election.
You'll like that movie. You'll like that movie. Okay, so that near nomination was clearly the high point of his political career. He vowed never to go into politics again. He had had enough of that. He worked for Rutherford B. Hayes. He declined nominations to a cabinet position and even a Supreme Court nomination. That's how soured he was over that. Can you imagine turning down a nomination to the Supreme Court if you're an attorney? He was just 44 years old. Of course, I realize in those days that was probably more than middle age for a lot of people. But still, he was a young man. And on 16 October 1878, he formed the firm of Bristow, Peet, Burnett, and Updike in New York City. He helped found the American Bar Association and was its second president the year after that. He was also vice president of the Civil Service Reform Association. So even though he gave up politics, you could see that he continued to work at things he felt were important. He worked in corporate law. He obviously made a lot of money. These three big cases were Bates Refrigerating, warehouse patents, and income tax cases. So you imagine these big companies and their higher-ups in those, they'd get in trouble with the IRS. They would hire this firm and they would work it out. He died suddenly of appendicitis at his home in the Bronx, and he was interred in Woodlawn Cemetery, Oak Hill plot. There's his headstone there. Now, that 1921 article about his grandfather's will not working, and another article that talked about his father's being reinterred at Glenwood and all that. When I stood here one time before, I told the group that it was Benjamin Helm Bristow that was buried at Edwards Hall, dug up and moved to Glenwood, because that's what's in the Todd County history that I've referred to for years and years and years. So 3 times that story's been told. So, somehow I doubt that all 3 of these gentlemen were actually dug up and reinterred. I believe it was his father today. I believe that really happened. More recent scholars have said that he's right here in the Bronx where he should be, and that clearly, let's go on. He's not at Edwards Hall. Edwards Hall, back at the time of the Edwards family, and when he was born even, was just this building. Do you see the central bay here? You see it coming out on the back? That was a sort of a 3-bay building, 2 stories high, clearly a mansion for the 1820s when it was built. But the story goes that, about 100 years ago, a little, not quite 100 years ago, the family that owned Edwards Hall visited Williamsburg. Right as Williamsburg, Virginia was becoming famous as a preservation spot, they had the idea, let's do that to our home. Let's make it like the houses at Williamsburg or the buildings there. They added these two wings and changed the entrance from west to the north, as you see it there. And that's the way I remember it as I grew up. You see the outbuildings and this, all of this. I believe it was 1978, I was practicing architecture in Clarksville. The owners came to me and said, would you help us? We've taken over my wife's family home, and it's still looks like it did after the Williamsburg thing. We want to be more of a modern house. I visited with them and they decided maybe they didn't need an architect. And on July 4th of that year, they had finished refurbishing the entire house. They had built this portico you see on the front, and they took a break from their work. They did a lot of the work themselves. The house burned. So they think they'd left some paint remover and rags under a stairwell, and it had combusted on its own. And it took out all of the back of the house and gutted everything. Took the entire roof off of the house.
Seems like remodeling does that sometimes.
It's what happened. So they came back to me and asked me if I'd help them rebuild it. So I oversaw the rebuilding of what you see up here in front. We did an addition over at this side because they wanted a modern kitchen and all that sort of thing. So if you go there today, what you'll see is new work. We really connected these buildings all together and what was left of them. But I believe you could see that the house today still retains some of its original grandeur, and is still one of the three major plantation houses in Illinois. What's going on here? You asked earlier about the status of the Edwards burial site. That's the thicket I got lost in. It wasn't a sunny day, and I had my compass, but that didn't work because I didn't know where my car was out there. But these walls were built at the time the house was renovated back in the 30s or 40s, whenever that was. And there's a lot of walls around there, and you can even see some of them out on the edges of the property today. I take this as one of the Todd County historians' major goals, is to really give Mr. Edwards what he deserves in having his cemetery cleaned up. If nothing else, a marker to show that he was a patriot of the American Revolution. Benjamin Helm Bristow's father was reinterred at Glenwood. There's his stone. And that's why I believe he was the only one of the three that actually got moved. There are only, to my knowledge, there are only 4 graves here. The man, Edwards, his son, and their wives. There may be some children there, but they don't have headstones. So we talked about the mystery of the reburials. I think I've explained that probably too much. We talked about the Green River Academy. That's the way it looks today. That group has done a wonderful job using the grant money that they've been given to bring that building back from really near total deterioration. I was at the site in 1971 when George Boone actually uncovered and dedicated the plaque to Benjamin Helm Bristow, explaining his soldiering and his lawyering. And that's really all I knew practically until you called me the other day and asked me to come and do this. I believe that ends this.
Yep.
Well, again, I hope that's what you came to see tonight, and I haven't messed it up too much. It's funny how when you see it on the screen up here, you can see every misspelling and every spacing. I hope there weren't too many errors in it, but I promise you there were. There were errors, omissions, and all of that. Anything you come up with, please let Mark know and he'll let me know and we'll get it straightened out. Thank you.